Europe is headed towards a demographic shift, and the European Union is actively accelerating this shift by adapting globalist immigration policies and positive discrimination or affirmative action social policies towards minorities, which are soon to be majorities in several major cities in Europe. Minorities are nowadays very generously funded, and they are being focused upon. Be it religious, national, or sexual minorities, the notion of their victimhood is being amplified, and the notion of culpability of the European for their socio-economic shortcomings is being pushed as a political axiom. After all, the official version of reality is that we are all equal and the same on all but the most superficial levels. According to our authorities, a utopia is just around the corner, if we'd just be eager to give up more national sovereignty, traditional morality, power over our own thoughts, our earnings and freedoms in favor of the representatives of the rainbow technocracy sitting in glass and steel houses in Brussels. Our majority becoming a minority is something to be celebrated because it creates true diversity, and after all, diversity is supposed to be our strength. A Europe of European nations, dozens of nations and traditions doesn't cut it. A Europe of diverse philosophies is something to be reframed and reduced in the fold of the left, and a hollowed out dead conservatism isolated to questions of economics and cultural aesthetics without any true value base. A Europe of diverse Christian traditions is not just to be reduced, but something to be ashamed of and replaced with diverse religiosity, atheism, and ideologically confined versions of Christianity. Europe nowadays is not really diverse enough. We are, according to EU ideology, supposed to import diversity from abroad and lose the very concept of nationhood. Whiteness? Whiteness is a historic error to be corrected by means of ideology and economical change. Whiteness is in itself oppressive and should be wiped off the face of the world and history. That's the price we have to pay for a rainbow utopia, according to our ideologues. But what if I told you that you could peek into the future? What if I told you that there is a rainbow nation already existing right now? A nation created by visionaries of humanity, heroes like Nelson Mandela. Let us lift the whale of time together and peer into the utopia that is South Africa. With me, I have an important guest, Simonon Roche. He comes from the rainbow nation of South Africa and is here to tell us what is to come to Europe if we heed the good advice of our leaders. He's the spokesperson of Suidlanders, I'm sorry, I probably butchered that. Suidlanders, an organization of people of European descent in South Africa. Simon, goeiedag.
Goeiedag.
So, could you tell us something about yourself first and the organization you represent? What moved you personally to do this, and what are your long-term intentions?
Very simply, I'm the spokesman for Suidlanders, which is a civil defense organization constituted under the protocols additional to the Geneva Conventions. The Geneva Conventions were, let's say, adopted in 1949 after World War II, and their purpose was to govern the prosecution of war in the future. And in 1977, the international community adopted the protocols additional to the Geneva Conventions as a sort of a way of closing up the holes in the Geneva Conventions concerning civilians, the circumstances of civilians in conflict, whether it's civil war or international war. And under those protocols, we as a identifiable ethnic group,
yes,
which is what they make specific provision for, are preparing a national emergency plan for civil war in South Africa. What prompted me to get involved was the recognition, the observation over time that the new South Africa Rainbow Nation is not nearly what the, if I may say so, sanctimonious countries of the Northern Hemisphere told us that it would be. Never mind what the ANC said. Never mind what the communists, the ANC and the South African Communist Party are more or less one entity, like Siamese twins. But the international community told us this was going to be a wonderful thing. And it became apparent almost immediately that it wasn't what they said. And it has since deteriorated very much. And I began to recognize that if you imagine it as a ball flying through the air, I could say to you, well, that ball is 10 meters from your mother's window, and after, a hundredth of a second, we could say, well, it's still 5 meters away. Maybe it won't hit the window. But with any common sense, you can see the trajectory of the ball is clearly heading for your mom's window. And it's going to smack the window and break it and maybe bounce inside and damage one of her vases.
So it's like a train wreck in slow motion.
Yes, exactly. There is a specific trajectory. And if that trajectory continues, then there is going to be a collision. And there is no sign at all that the ball or the train is slowing down that things are going to get better. Not because I'm a crazy, racist, maniac. Any objective intellect can tell that there is no reason, no substantial reason to believe that things are going to get any better in South Africa. So we must assume that this trajectory will continue and prepare for the natural consequences.
Simon, I have to say something, because many people will be probably surprised by what you said, because as it is presented abroad in Europe, etc., it is presented as if South Africa was a very nice place with some racially neutral problems, but overall it's all peaches and creams and people live in harmony together, and maybe there are some historical errors to be reconciled, but people overall think it's a nice place there. So it's not peaches and creams over there, is it?
Well, if you consider, for example, that the murder rate, what they call the intentional homicide rate in Europe, is about 1 per 100,000. If you consider that in the USA, I believe that it's 4.88 per 100,000. In South Africa, it's 37 per 100,000. Now, people will, of course, say, yes, but black people and white people, die at similar rate. That's not the point. That's not the point at all. The point is that in this society that was supposed to be some sort of a utopia, we have massive rates of crime and violence. We have a declining currency. Our sovereign bond rating is one level above junk. The government has recently admitted that in recent years, 700 billion has been stolen from the government's account, as it were. So there's massive crime, massive corruption, a decline in the society. There are many areas that are completely unsafe. The number of protests in South Africa, that is to say the burning down of schools, burning down of universities, burning down of municipal offices, it is absolutely phenomenal. If anybody does any research on that, they'll soon see that in any year, it's many thousands of such incidents, not dozens or even hundreds, thousands. I'll give you another example which illustrates the conditions of the new South African Rainbow Nation. We have a miniature province a bit like Washington, D.C. Not exactly, but there's a similar idea. It's a miniature province called Gauteng. It is the province in which the cities of Johannesburg and Pretoria are located. That province alone generates 13% of the GDP of the whole of Africa. That province receives its water from the Vaal River. Vaal means like pale or something like that. There are 144 pumping stations for drinking water on the Vaal River for the province of Gauteng. It means the place of gold. All 144 of the 144 are not working. Do you believe this?
That's terrible.
So I'm sure that there are many people in Europe who believe the excuse my language, but the bull dust that BBC and Sky News, ABC, NBC, CBS, the Tiger Zeitung, and all of these criminals feed them. But there is a lot more reality to the story. When the murder rate is, 3,700% higher than the murder rate of Europe, that's not a beautiful place to be. I have in the side of my skull here some damage. If I press it hard, then it'll be painful for 2 or 3 days, where I was assaulted. I was chopped with an axe separately, shot at twice separately. My father was, again, these are all separate incidents, made to kneel in the sand on the beach and bend his head forward so that they could kill him. And one of my sons was accosted on the way home from school to be mugged. His mother's house has been burgled from top to bottom twice. Here we're speaking about one portion of one family. I could go on all day long.
Might I ask you, are people also specifically targeted for their race? Are white people the Boer?
Yes,
because you said that the murder rates are similar, but are they though? Because I don't believe that there are any exact statistics on this.
Tomasz, the murder rate, the black on black violence, murder, rape, robbery in South Africa, in the townships, is phenomenally high. They are places of chaos and anarchy and crime. However, if you compare the murder rate of farmers, then it's 4, maybe 5 times as high. The murder rate of farmers is something like 200 per 100,000. And these are the best estimates that can be made because the government refuses to release the precise statistics. And as I said to a journalist from the Times of London 2 weekends ago, I said to her, you must use common sense with these things. Even if you don't agree with me, you must use common sense and acknowledge that there has to be a reason why they are keeping these things a secret. They possess the statistics, but they won't reveal them. So what we're able to do with some common sense is to create highs and lows, a window in which the statistics reside. For example, the statistics pertaining to the murder rate of farmers. It could be above 169 per 100,000 and below about 224 per 100,000, somewhere in between there. Nobody is sure. But 169 per 100,000 is high enough, and that's the minimum possible number.
That's terrible. And what I heard, it's not even because if in Slovakia you say murder, you imagine someone being shot. It's not really common. There was one journalist killed a year ago. And there was almost an uprising in the country. It was absolutely bonkers. So in Slovakia, if we imagine a murder. We imagine someone being shot or someone dying in a fight or something. But what I read about these things and what I heard from people from people talking about it, it was horrible, grisly murders. What happens over there? Because I want people to understand the scope of brutality that's happening in your country right now.
Well, you're absolutely correct. The murders are often characterized by the most unspeakable violence. I can tell you many stories. I can tell you a story of a woman who had, like barbed wire, we call it razor wire, wrapped around her neck and pulled tight until it cut through her neck. I can tell you a story of a woman who was tied to a chair, and the perpetrators took a drilling machine and drilled her through her joints.
It's terrible.
And then her ankles and knees and hips, and she eventually died. I can tell you the story of a 3-year-old girl who was raped by 4 men. You can imagine, not to be crass, but let us be serious here. You can imagine the size of the hole in question at the age of 3 years. And now she's being mounted by 4 grown black men. Can you imagine the pain? Can you imagine the tearing? The tearing open. Can you imagine how far that thing would pass up into her, given her little body proportions? She survived that rape. So they bundled her up in newspaper and poured petrol over it and set it alight. In the post-mortem, the autopsy, they revealed that she survived the rape. She was not dead when they put her in the paper. There is another story, quite a famous story, of a 4-year-old girl who was raped by 3 men while her parents were forced to watch. She was nailed, crucified to the kitchen table of the farmstead, of the farmhouse. I read recently about a man in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, a farmer, who was assailed by, I can't remember, 3 or 4 guys. He was an elderly man in his 60s, I believe. And they beat him down, and then they took a pitchfork and stabbed him with the pitchfork, and he didn't die. So they set him alight, poured fuel over him, set him alight. Another farmer, not so long ago, perhaps or a year ago at most, was tied up with wire, with barbed wire, and put into his pickup truck, and it was locked. And then they put petrol over the pickup truck and set the pickup truck alight, and he burned to death that way. There's quite a well-known story of a woman who went to fetch her child from Elon Musk's high school. Elon Musk of Tesla and SpaceX, South African. And she went to the high school to fetch the child in the evening. And she was grabbed by some men and taken out onto the field. And she was raped to death with a broom handle. But the stories go on and on and on. You know, we could talk about this for days. Just recently, an elderly couple, a man and woman in their 70s, were caught in their home, and they were tied to chairs, and the perpetrators saw that there was food cooking on the stove. There was a pot of oil for what? I don't know, maybe for French fries, I couldn't tell you, and a pot of water, maybe to boil potatoes, I don't know. But it was reported by the police, and it got into the newspapers, that they took the pot of oil, you know, they heated the pot of oil and the pot of water up, and they poured them in turn over the heads of the man and the woman. That's how it goes. This is the new South African rainbow nation. And these stories are not isolated stories. I could tell you stories all day long. It's part and parcel of our new society.
Is the government just trying to obfuscate a problem, or did they somehow cause it? Are they culprit in the crimes? What do they do against it?
You're correct on both counts. They do obfuscate the problem because they don't want the world to know the true extent of the madness of the new South African rainbow nation utopia. And to some extent, they are complicit. They are culpable in a tacit and an active sense. Tacitly, they are culpable because they don't make the effort to stop these crimes that they should be making. And in an active sense, as Dr. Gregory Stanton, the head of World Genocide Watch, the world's foremost expert on genocide, as he has said at a speech in South Africa, I believe in the year 2012, I believe, he said it is clear to him as an expert. And by the way, he's a liberal. Yes. He's a man who adopted, he and his wife had children, and they adopted 2 black children from the Kingdom of Swaziland. So it's important that I say this so that people don't think that I'm drawing on the sources that are convenient to my narrative. And this is a liberal man who said that according to his scientific analysis of what is happening in South Africa, it is clear that the government is, his exact words I don't remember, but that the government is behind it, that the government has a hand in what is occurring. We believe that the reason for that is that the government is endeavoring to implement a communist revolution in a very slow manner, a slow burn revolution, and that one of the core revolutionary tactics is to get the opponents out of the country, to get the farmers off the land, to terrify people. And, you know, there's also anecdotal evidence. I don't want to give anecdotal evidence because people who don't live in South Africa won't appreciate it. It will sound like I'm making up my own sort of, or drawing my own conclusions. But we who know this thing and who understand this thing and who are familiar with this thing and who observe this thing know that there's something strange going on, something that cannot be explained unless there is an agenda. It's not random. It's not sundry or miscellaneous. It's intentional.
And as I heard, it's not just things that directly threaten lives of people. It's also things that threaten the economic livelihood of people. What could you tell me about systemic discrimination of Boer people in South Africa?
Well, the government has a set of laws called broad-based black economic empowerment. And those laws are affirmative action laws whose purpose is to ensure that the society, the government, the bureaucracy, the business world reflect the demographics of South Africa. And how they work is that, let's say let us say that there was a contract to provide tires to the government's fleet of Mercedes-Benz. And you and I were both competing for that contract.
Yes.
I, as a white man owning a white company with white employees and white suppliers, would submit a tender to the government, and we would say, all right, we can provide Goodyear tires for $100 each. You, as a black person, would come along and you would say, well, I've got Bridgestone tires. They're not so good, but they're good enough. And they are $200 each. The government then uses a formula to compensate for the fact that you are black and you may get the contract. But in any case, I cannot even submit an application. I cannot tender on this contract unless at least 25% of my business is owned by black people. And preferably 51%. So what they will say is, well, you get 1 point, 1 mark for every percent that your company is owned by black people. And then you get a point for every black employee. And then you get a point for every black supplier. So what happens is that the man who sells the tires will only do business with the tire manufacturer that is black. And the tire manufacturer will only do business with the rubber company that is black. There's a multiplier effect that is absolutely devastating. It's very clever, highly intelligent. You must give these people credit for brilliance, absolute brilliance.
Well, in a way, in a certain way, but wait, aren't you guys a minority? Aren't minorities supposed to be protected somehow? Aren't there supposed to be minority rights? Or is this just about you being white?
Look, this is Africa. It's not Europe. You know, you guys hate yourselves so much that you're willing to implement these laws that are to your own detriment as citizens of your country. It doesn't work that way here. The minority is generally painted as the Goliath, you know, as if we have some special potency, some special ability, or some special magic that will allow us to dominate 58 million people. Look, Tomasz, in the real world is not BBC. The real world is not Angela Merkel.
The real world is it doesn't even intersect with BBC, I think.
In the real world, you protect your people. You protect your culture, you protect your identity. And black people are conscious of that. You know, as you know, probably the single greatest scourge of Western society, or let's say of European-derived society of the past 150 years has been intellectualism. It has been the idea that you can absorb some knowledge and that makes it valid. As long as you can absorb it, it's valid. Even if there is no common sense whatsoever. None. Now, black people are not guilty of that. They're not prone to that. Black people tend to depend heavily upon common sense and wisdom. You know, you can convince a white person, a European, that Margaret Mead was correct when she said there is no difference between men and women. And there are no differences between races. You know, just some superficial things, breasts, whatever, curly hair. You will never convince a black person of that. Never in your life.
I have a creeping suspicion that even if we become the minorities in Western countries, even if it is projected then that in the US and in several other countries, people of European descent will become the minorities. I have this creeping suspicion that even if that happens, they won't be considered a real minority. It will be the leftists will find a bullshit excuse. Sorry for my language. They will find an excuse why they are still indeed being in power and why they are systematically oppressing the others, etc., etc. But
exactly, and they will feed you enough fluoride in your toothpaste to weaken your mind and your body and your will enough that you believe it, or that you at least acquiesce to it.
And
which is it's what's happening in Europe at the moment. What is very interesting for us as outsiders. Now, of course, we eat similar food to you. We use similar toothpaste. This is true. But the full effects of modern lifestyles on Europeans is not being felt quite so much by us as it is by you guys. And it's interesting for us to observe the effeminization of your societies. You know, every second person now believes that they are transgender, and they may be right. They may not be wrong. Because just think of it this. Look, I was reading an article recently on BBC about a man who specializes in making other men's wives pregnant because he's strong and his semen is alive, his sperm. He is on 114 children. You know, the fertility rates of men in Western Europe are very, very, very low.
I know.
And this is at a time when people believe that they're transsexual, transgender, this, that, the next thing. Maybe those people are not wrong. Maybe they are right. Maybe they are not, the masculinity has been sucked out of them. And if you observe this thing closely, it's far more men who believe that they are women than women who believe that they are men. This is an attack on Western masculinity through the food, through the use of, look, I don't know if you know this. I'm sorry, Tomasz, but I just want to complete this point. I don't know if you know this, but you, in your whole life, have probably never tasted the meat of a cow. What you will have tasted when you ate beef is the meat of a bull. What happens is that when the animals are born, let's say you have 10 cows, and they all have little babies, and you've got 5 little bullocks and 5 little heifers. The bullocks will have their balls cut off because the testosterone gives a horrible taste to the meat. This is all meat production in the Western world. In the Northern Hemisphere, in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Africa, they cut the balls off. Then they feed the animal with synthetic female hormones, like a transgender. You know, these transgender people, they eat these hormones, women's hormones, so that they get little breasts and so that their buttocks get bigger and their thighs get plump and they look girly, right? They do the same with the male cattle. They keep the female cattle one side so that they can reproduce the next year. They take all the male cattle, they cut their balls off, and then they give them synthetic female hormones. All of them, always. The reality is, and there are many more examples. I don't want to do all the talking. You know, I want to answer your questions. But the reality is that our societies are being screwed up. This is a fact. The medicine that they use, the synthetic estrogen that they use to bulk up those oxen so that they get fatter and they can earn more money when they get sold. If you give those same synthetic estrogen, if you give it to the cows, they cannot fall pregnant. That's how bad this stuff is.
Well,
that's how easy it is. If you give female hormones to a female, she cannot fall pregnant. I'm talking about the cows now. The stuff is lethal. And that's what your children are eating from the day that they're born or from the day that they're weaned from their mother's breast.
But it's not just this. It's also nowadays hormonal contraception is so common that it is even found in drinking water, and also non-fermented soy. Eating non-fermented soy in everything. They say, it's just vegetable estrogen. It doesn't affect anything. That's not really true. And also what you said, the women, they don't turn into men. They don't need to. Nowadays, the female position is so masculine in a way. It's so archetypically masculine that they don't really need to. They are dominant. They are depicted dominantly. They have quotas for being employed in certain places. They are protected by law, and they usually fall pregnant. If they fall pregnant, they usually fall pregnant around the age of 30 and more, and by then they are not really very fertile. That's another aspect. We tell to our daughters that it's a good idea to postpone falling pregnant, founding a family, etc., etc. It's not true because the climax of female fertility is, I think, around 18, and after that it falls down. So if we push this narrative of career women, of career mothers, that you have to study and get a basic career and then you can have children, you get what you have, and that's a crisis of fertility in Europe. But that's a different theme entirely. Let's return to South Africa. But thank you very much for saying that.